it's Kyle Frasca from Group 2 here. So I'm going to be doing a little part of our PowerPoint presentation today. And I wanted to do something special, but unfortunately this chapter has a lot of definitions. So I thought it would just be important to point out that it'd be a good idea to remember the definitions and write down the definitions, because I think that's, if there's anything important in this chapter, it would be to remember the definitions. All right. Thank you. So what is a legal system? A legal system, it says, is the rules that regulate behavior along the processes by which the laws are enforced and through which redress for grievances is obtained. The system in a country is influenced by the prevailing political system, and legal systems are important for business because they define how business transactions are executed, and they identify the rights and obligations of parties involved in business transactions. So what are the different kinds of legal systems? There's 3 types of legal systems. There's the common law, based on tradition, precedent, and custom. There's the civic law, based on the detailed set of laws organized into codes. And then there's the theocratic law that is based on religious teachings. So last slide we talked quickly about the common law, civil law, and the theocratic law. I just thought it'd be a good idea to go a quick look over those in a little bit more detail. So it says here that in the common law system, the judges have the power to interpret the law so that it applies to the unique circumstances of an individual case. So this common law is a little bit more flexible than the others. And then there's the civil law system, which is a set law organized into codes. And there's many countries that have this, including Germany, France, Japan, and Russia. And it's a very detailed legal code. And lastly, there's the theocratic. And so there's still some places in the world that are based on religious teachings, like in some places in Islamic, or that are big into the Islamic religion. It says that the Islamic law is the holy book of Islam, the Quran, and that there's some teachings that are like laws, but it says that even in those places, they still have a mixture of common or civil law as well. So how are contracts enforced in different legal systems? So a contract is a document that specifies the conditions under which an exchange is to occur and the details of the rights and obligations of the parties involved. A contract law is the body of law that governs contract enforcement. Under a common law system, contracts tend to be very detailed, with all contingencies spelled out. Under a civil law system, contracts tend to be much shorter and less specified because many issues are already covered in the civil code. And in the textbook, it also mentions that it's more expensive to write up contracts in a common law system because they're longer and you have to put more details into them, whereas it's a lot less expensive to do so in a civil law system. So which country laws should apply in a contract dispute? The United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, the CIGS, establishes a uniform set of rules governing certain aspects of the making and performance of everyday commercial contracts between buyers and sellers who have their places of businesses in different nations. It is ratified by the US and about 70 countries. But many larger trading nations, including Japan and the UK, have not agreed to the provisions of the CIGS and opt for arbitration instead. So a lot of you might be wondering why countries would not want to be ratified by the CISG, and it's pretty tricky to answer this question, but this website here, created by Sally Moss, comes up with a few reasons, and it kind of just seems like it comes down to it not being a priority for the country, and that it would be a lot of paperwork. So yeah. So how are property rights and corruption related? So it says property rights are the legal rights over the use to which a resource is put and over the use made of any income that may be derived from that resource. So it says property rights can be violated through private action, which is theft, piracy, and blackmail, and it could be violated through public action, legally, for example, excessive taxation, or bribes and blackmailing. And then it says high levels of corruption reduce foreign direct investment and the level of international trade and economic growth rate in a country. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act makes it illegal for the U.S. companies to bribe foreign government officials to obtain or maintain business over which that foreign official has authority. Facilitating or expediting payments or secure or expedite routine government action are permitted. So this graph here, you can see Canada's pretty clean. It says like Somalia, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Russia, India, Nigeria are on the more corrupt side. And it says that it'll be harder, in the textbook anyways, it says that it'll be harder for those countries to increase their direct foreign exchange because not many other countries want to do that because it's very risky. So how can intellectual property be protected? So it says intellectual property is property that is the product of intellectual activity. That's kind of a circular definition. This can be protected by using patents, which is an exclusive right for defined periods to the manufacture, use, or sale of that convention. And they can range from like 10 to or 5 to 20 years, maybe more. Just kind of depends on the product. And it says copyright, the exclusive legal right of authors, composers, playwrights, artists, and publishers to publish dispersing their work as they see fit. And this is trademarks, design and names by which merchants or manufacturers designate and differentiate their product. So that would be like a logo, and a few other things too. So protection of intellectual property rights differ from country to country. The World Intellectual Property Organization and the So to avoid piracy, firms can stay away from countries where intellectual property laws are lax, they can file lawsuits, and they can lobby governments for international property rights and agreements and enforcement. So it says here that two of the main, they have conventions to protect against intellectual property. There's the World Intellectual Property Organization that creates treaties to protect intellectual property. And one of the conventions was Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property. And it's been signed by 170 nations. And it says that the issue is weak enforcement of piracy of intellectual property. And it says Thailand and China have often been amongst the worst offenders in Asia. Pirated computer software is widely available in China. Similarly, the streets of Bangkok are lined with stands selling pirated copies of Rolex watches, Levi's jeans, DVDs, and computer software. Think like a manager. Intellectual property theft is a major issue in the global software industry. One method that software companies use to avoid the threat of piracy is to develop open source software that is distributed free of charge and with part or all of the source code available to other programmers. Users may alter or improve the program as they see fit, so long as they share their improvements with the rest of the open source community. What are some potential advantages and disadvantages to developing open source software? As the head of a promising software startup, would you consider developing an open source product? What do you guys think? What is product safety and liability? So it says product safety laws are certain standards to which a product must adhere. Product liability involves holding a firm and its officers responsible when a product causes injury, damage, or death. And liability laws tend to be less extensive in less developed nations. So why is product safety and product liability important? So here's a question. Why does the high cost of liability insurance in the US make American companies less competitive? Is it ethical to follow host country standards when product safety laws are stricter in a firm's home country than in a foreign country? And the last question, is it ethical to follow host country standards when liability laws are more lax in the host country? So in the first question, it asks if the high cost of liability if the high cost of product liability would make US products less competitive in the market. And it says here in this text created by Jandolph J. Stamen that it's not the increases in the cost of products, but the fear of product liability that has a chilling effect on product development, innovation, experimentation, and manufacture. The US product liability is causing US-made products to be less competitive in price and may ultimately cause US-made products to be less competitive technologically. So the second question is it ethical to follow host country standards when product safety laws are stricter in a home country than in a foreign country? And I think that this Harvard Business Review answered this kind of pretty well. So it's kind of debatable. Obviously, it's hard to tell if what's right and what's wrong. Like that's a philosophy thing, and it's all relative. Um, but basically, when it comes to laws, you can't say that one country is better than the other. And basically, it comes down to just when you're in Rome, do what the Romans do. Yeah, I do think that in order to improve the world, it would be good to implement a little bit more restriction. Because there is some perception that there might be a little bit of abuse of a company. They're sending a company over to a different country where there's less restrictions so that they can get away with less or they can get away with more, and they have a better competitive advantage because they make more money off of it. But yeah. And the last question, is it ethical to follow host country standards when liability laws are more lax in the host country? So I think this is somewhat similar to the second question. And it really just comes down to that countries don't like to, they don't, like people, they often don't like when a country comes into a business comes into their country and they act in their own culture. A country still wants to keep their culture and their law. So in that way, it's not really our position to determine what they can and cannot do in a country. So like, is it ethical? I don't know. It's kind of, it's a little bit iffy. It's hard to tell, but it is in a country and they have human beings just like us to make the laws and change their country. So it's not our place to kind of just butt in there and decide for them. So how can managers determine a market's overall attractiveness? The overall attractiveness of a country as a potential market and or investment site for an international business depends on balancing the benefits, costs, and risks associated with doing business in that country. Other things being equal, more attractive countries have democratic political institutions, market-based economies, and strong legal systems that protect property rights and limit corruption.